We are draining humanity's lifeblood through vampiric overconsumption and unsustainable use.
Are buying 60% more clothing today than they were 18 years ago, and they keep those clothes about half as long.
Fueling a dangerous cycle of overconsumption.
Overconsumption.
Living in the world of overconsumption.
Overconsumption.
Overconsumption. It's this big climate change word that's losing its meaning to people like you and me. It's because it's everywhere. Now, for me, I want to reduce my impact on the environment, but I just don't know where to start. And ever since starting university, I've heard this word a lot. Whether it's our overconsumption of food products, clothing, or other miscellaneous items, and just how it's destroying our world. But in my day-to-day life, I don't really get this feeling, so I decided to figure out what's actually going on here. How is overconsumption really affecting our environment? How do we contribute to it? And what are the different factors that go into it? So in this journey, I just want to bring you with me. I want to help you understand what overconsumption really means for everyday consumers like you and me. So, let's get started.
Our lives have become so busy that we still kind of walk around a grocery store with some blinders on, following the same path we always take, buying the same things, not really questioning too much.
This is Miguel Santos, the main environmental, social, and governance guy for Save On Foods. He handles everything sustainability from packaging waste to food waste and recycling materials.
So buying that ugly carrot if you're going to use it for soup, buying that older banana because you're going to be making banana bread.
A big problem with consumers is that they only really want the best looking products, whether it's fruits, vegetables, or anything else they might be buying. Something with like a bruise on it, we might not want to buy. Now, we might be thinking we might be getting a better product, but that might not be the case. If a fruit or vegetable has a bruise or two on it, it's going to taste relatively the same as one that doesn't. This often leads to a problem with food waste. When we don't buy something that might not look perfect and pristine, it sits on the shelf and gets worse and worse until it's thrown away. But as a consumer, how do I justify buying, let's say, a banana with a couple bruises on it when I can buy a perfectly fine banana at the same price?
Ooh, actually, yeah, I don't really care about how that looks or how old that is or how loose it is. If there's a beautiful recipe for something that I can use that for at home today. So playing around with the messaging and the education in store has been something that we've been playing with.
This is just the natural way consumers think, however. Miguel at Save On Foods looks at different ways that you can incentivize customers to think differently about their products. This is a tough job, however. Rewriting how customers like you and me think is pretty difficult because we've been thinking this way for decades and generations. Ever since a store like Walmart has opened up and provided this much selection, it's always been a problem.
People's attention spans and the number of things, stickers, prices, sale items that are, slapping you in the face every time you go to a grocery store can get a little overwhelming as well. So it's trying to play that fine line. We found it challenging to really read or understand how best to present information like this.
This overstimulation is a difficult balancing act for different stores to address. While customers might actually want to know where their food is located and grown and sourced and how it's made, etc., it's not always easily provided to them. We already have so much to worry about as customers. We have to worry about price, about sizes, about different brand comparisons, and all these other things when you're walking down the aisles. Maybe we don't have time to actually think about every little step when it comes to buying our produce, our meat, or anything else.
I'll just, be like, okay, fine, I'll just buy this orange. I'm not really going to look into, where was the source, how long did it have to stay in cold storage or on a train or a bus or a plane?
This is why adequate methods of information sharing to consumers is necessary for addressing the overconsumption issue.
In order to gain multiple perspectives on this issue, I went down to this tiny little town in southern Alberta called Hilda. This town has about 30 or 40 residents maybe, and this is what Google shows when you search it up. But in reality, it's a quaint little town with a strong sense of community. It even has a little convenience store called Bender's, and this is the first store to open up in the town for decades. While I was there, I interviewed two wonderful farmers named Andy Kirschenman and Josh Beck. They gave me some awesome insight into the roles that farmers play in the economy and how we get our food, as well as some of the struggles that they might have.
consumers who are mostly urban are so far removed from farms generationally that they don't have those grandparents or aunts and uncles to tell them or to show them what's going on out here. I think we need to do a better job of educating the consumer on where stuff's coming from and how they're getting it.
And while Josh is saying that the farmers need to make an effort to reach out to the consumers must also be thinking the same way. They need to be accepting of this, and they also need to be reaching out themselves. The problem is, a lot of consumers don't know where to look. They don't know where to find farmers to talk to, or who to ask to even get access to a farmer.
I think the consumer wants to know. I think they don't know where to ask. And they don't know how to go about asking, because I don't know if they don't want to think that they're inconveniencing the grower, or they don't know any growers or farmers that they can just go up to and ask.
For consumers that want to create a relationship with actual farmers, it is a benefit to the farmer and the consumer. It helps for both the farmer to understand where the consumer is coming from. We do a lot of things that make sense agronomically, so make sense in the field for our bottom lines that maybe don't make that much sense from a consumer's perspective, and honestly maybe don't actually make sense.
This disconnect can largely be due to a certain process in late-stage capitalism. Middlemen. Along the way from getting your food to your table, there are so many hands in this process. And it not only increases the price for you, the consumer, but it also disconnects you from the primary production process. Farmers.
There is a disconnect between consumers and producers. It comes from the fact that our food system has so many layers in between. We have the producer, then we have a grain company. My wheat is then sold to a larger grain company. They then will usually sell it to another company that will be part of the milling, so making the wheat into flour. That flour will probably be sold to another company for distribution to be bagged into whatever sizes that is necessary. Then it's going to go to a bakery. That bakery is either going to be in store at a large supermarket or somewhere that's smaller, an independent bakery. So by the time you get to the consumer buying the loaf of bread with my wheat, there are a multitude of layers within that information can be lost.
Now, there are ways to avoid this as the consumer, like direct to consumer. Direct to consumer is where consumers don't necessarily go to places like Costco and Walmart to get their products, like meat or different produce. Instead, they go directly to the farmer. This not only increases the profits for the farmers, but it also reduces the cost for you. Without these middlemen in the process, they can focus on producing high quality food instead of stuff like mass production. An economy like this is much more sustainable for stuff like our health and the health of our ecosystems. The problem is that this is nearly impossible to do on a large scale.
So we were doing direct to consumer. It was really good. They couldn't believe the difference in the products that they were getting from us versus from the grocery stores.
A farmer's job is to grow food to feed the world. Being a farmer is just a job like any other as well that raises money to provide for their families and for their futures. And so stuff like fertilizers, pesticides, and other means to increase harvest levels are needed in certain circumstances to ensure both an income for the farmer and their family, and just generally to ensure food supply for average everyday consumers like you and me.
In our case this year, we sprayed for grasshoppers on almost all of our acres. We killed beneficial insects without a doubt. Because of doing that, it becomes a case of, are we going to harvest a crop and spray grasshoppers, or are we going to leave the grasshoppers and not harvest a crop? And that's where we got to this year.
This is a constant question from farmers that they need to ask. Some consumers would honestly isolate this act and say, hey, they just sprayed for insects. That's not the case in all these scenarios. Context is needed when talking about these points. These farmers know their craft. This is their job, and they've been doing it for a long time. Both Josh and Andy have about 100 years of this farm being in their family, so I'd say they know what they're doing pretty well. I, knowing next to nothing about farming, saw this grasshopper infestation firsthand. I mean, going outside, you couldn't even go a couple steps without stepping on a handful of grasshoppers. And while these acts are unfortunately necessary in most cases, technology improvements have drastically reduced their impacts on ecosystems. These little things add up, and honestly, farmers have an incentive to do this because, number one, they save on pesticide costs, and number two, they care about this land. They need this land to survive. This is their livelihood. Why would they damage it long term when this is what they know them and their family are going to use in the future?
I believe it's the consumers that have the least ability to pay for their food, especially food that is not bad for us, are the ones that will be most served by knowing that their food is produced in a manner that's environmentally and ecologically and economically stable. They are the ones who are going to derive the most benefit from it from a nutritional standpoint.
So what Andy is saying here is that farmers usually have a choice of two things. Number one, they can either sell their products at a higher price to appease this certain niche like organic foods or grass-fed beef maybe, and get more profits for themselves, but unfortunately only appealing to that one niche that can afford that higher price. Or number two, sell a higher quality product that Alberta is known to produce at a lower price, so consumers that might be nutritionally poor can afford still and benefit highly from it being accessible to them at higher quantities and at a lower price. Whatever, I'll edit it later. Overconsumption is a big word at the end of the day. It means a lot of different things, but in general, I barely touch the surface of this. However, in Alberta, there are people, farmers and even stores that are working to reduce their impacts on the environment and address this issue of overconsumption. This issue is not on you. You're not to blame for not wanting to buy the bruised apple or not going the extra mile to check your produce and to check where it came from, doing the extra research. And you're also not to blame for buying the cheaper product at the end of the day. What I'm trying to say here is there's hope. There's hope for the future. There are some people who are trying to make change. Not everyone is, but there are some. And it's our duty as consumers to understand that and to take note of what stores, what farmers, what other people are doing to reduce their impacts. Knowing a store's values before you go shopping there, whether they actually care about sustainability, whether they care about your local farmers or not, is a big thing you need to take into account. I challenge you, next time you go buy poultry, fish, any produce, check if there's a label that says made in Canada or Alberta beef, a sustainably sourced, or any ocean-wise label. I'm sure you'll be surprised at what you find and how easy it actually is to shop and support local businesses and farmers. Finally, I just want to say, talk to a farmer. If you know one or you know how to get into contact with one, it's worth a chat. If they're anything like the people I met in Hilda, it'll be a wonderful conversation. And they want to talk with you and they want to connect with you. Through this conversation, just ask questions. This transparency and communication was a major talking point in all the farmers that I interviewed in this film. And it's something that we really do need to take into account. So if you're all about this sustainability thing and reducing your impact on the environment, this could be a pretty good first step. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you at least enjoyed this film, or I taught you at least one thing about overconsumption or anything like that. And generally, I just hope I gave you some hope for the future.